Welcome back to the Dispute.a podcast. I'm Paul, and this is episode 6. So far in this series, we've looked at disputes from the buyer's side. This episode flips the camera around. We're going to look at the developer's position. The reason this matters is simple. You cannot negotiate well against a counterparty you don't understand. A buyer who imagines the developer as either a villain or a bureaucratic wall is working with a caricature. A buyer who understands how developers actually think about disputes negotiates from a far stronger footing. Developers are not monolithic. The first correction: the developer is not one thing. There are large established developers with professional contracts teams, deep legal resources, strong balance sheets, and a long-term reputation to protect. There are mid-tier developers with fewer resources and more sensitivity to cash flow and reputation. There are smaller and newer developers, some well-run, some stretched. These different developers approach disputes differently, and the buyer's strategy should account for which kind they're dealing with. A large, established developer is unlikely to be moved by reputational pressure on a single dispute. They handle many, but they are also more likely to follow process predictably, honor what they agree, and have the resources to resolve cleanly when they decide to. A stretched developer might be more movable on a single dispute, because the cash flow or reputational pressure lands harder, but might also be less reliable in honoring an agreement. The developer's core incentive, the project, not the dispute. Here's the most important thing to understand about how developers think. For the developer, the dispute is not the main event. The project is the main event. The dispute is a distraction, a use of contract steam, time, a potential drag on cash flow, a complication in the resale of a unit. The developer's dominant incentive is to get the dispute off the table, so they can focus on delivering and selling the project. This is genuinely useful for a buyer to understand because it means the developer often has more incentive to resolve than the buyer assumes. The buyer experiences the dispute as enormous. The developer experiences it as one item on a list, but one item on a list still has a cost, and the developer would often rather pay a reasonable cost to clear the item than carry it. The room for pre-legal resolution comes substantially from this. Where the developer's flexibility is, given that incentive, where does a developer actually have room to move? On timing. A developer can often move faster than their default process, when there's a reason to. Timing flexibility costs the developer little and can be worth a lot to a buyer. On the practical application of their rights. A developer has a legal right to a tiered retention under Article 11, but has the right to retain the maximum and will insist on. The maximum, in every case, are different things. A developer clearing an item off the list with a unit they can resell sometimes accepts less than the maximum legal entitlement to get a clean, fast, uncontested exit. On structure. A developer often has flexibility in how a resolution is structured, even when they have little flexibility on the total. A payment plan restructure, a transfer to a different unit, a revised schedule. On the documented, cooperative exit, developers value finality, a buyer offering a clean, documented no. Further claims exit is offering the developer something of real value, certainty. Where the developer's flexibility is not equally important, where developers will not move. They will not generally move on a position the law clearly supports for them, against a buyer with a weak position. They will not generally move in response to pressure they've learned to absorb. Angry emails, threats they've heard 100 times. They will not generally move fast for a buyer who isn't organized. If the buyer's position is a mess, the developer's rational move is to wait, and they will not move at all if moving sets a precedent they can't afford. A developer with many buyers in similar situations may refuse a concession to one buyer specifically because granting it invites the same demand from everyone else. What this means for the buyer's approach. Putting this together, the buyer's approach should be shaped by the developer's actual incentive structure. Offer the developer what they actually value. Finality, a clean documented exit, a reduced drag on their contracts team. Be organized, because disorganized buyers get weighted out. Apply leverage that the developer hasn't learned to absorb. Credible, specific, backed by action leverage moves developers. Generic pressure does not. Read the developer type and the precedent risk, and calibrate. The ask to the developer's real flexibility. Ask for movement on timing, structure, and a practical application of rights, rather than demanding concessions in the places they structurally can't move. The honest limit. The honest limit of all this. Understanding the developer's position improves a buyer's negotiation, but it does not change the underlying legal reality. If the buyer's legal position is weak, understanding the developer perfectly still leaves the buyer with a weak position. What understanding the developer does is ensure the buyer extracts the full value of whatever room genuinely exists. It doesn't manufacture room that the law hasn't left. For the developer, the dispute is never the main event, the project is. The The buyer's leverage lives in the developer's wish to clear the item off the list, but that leverage is bounded by the legal framework underneath, not unlimited. What to take from this episode? Developers are not monolithic. Large, mid-tier, and stretch developers approach disputes differently. The developer's dominant incentive is the project, not the dispute. That incentive is a substantial part of the buyer's leverage. Developers have flexibility on timing, on the practical application of their rights, on structure, and in response to a clean documented exit. They have little flexibility against a weak buyer position, against absorbed pressure, against disorganization, or where a concession sets an unaffordable precedent. The buyer's approach should offer the developer what they value, be organized, apply leverage they haven't done to absorb, and calibrate the ask to where the developer can actually move, and the honest limit, understanding the developer extracts the full value of the room that exists. It does not create room the law hasn't left. In the next episode we turn to payment plan restructuring, what's actually negotiable when a buyer can't sustain the schedule they signed. Thanks for listening. The full transcript is at transcript.a. For pre-legal dispute support, dispute.a, that work is done.